Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast, where we explore the real stories from real entrepreneurs behind building a business, the wins, the setbacks, and everything in between. Wes Towers is the founder of Uplift 360, an Australian-based marketing agency that focuses on what he calls search everywhere optimization. He's also the author of The Simple Manifesto, marketing principles to save you time, increase profit, and create your dream business in a snap. Wes helps brands cut through the noise, simplify their message, and bring back what really matters in marketing, human communication. Today, we'll talk about his entrepreneurial journey, the lessons he's learned along the way, and how we can all keep our businesses authentic in an age dominated by AI. And it all starts right now. Wes Towers, thanks for being my guest today. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you from the other side of the planet here in Australia. So good to see you.
Yeah, we are definitely taking advantage of satellites and cables and who knows what. So Wes, before we get into marketing and AI, which I'm really excited to dive into, I'm fascinated with AI. But before we dive into that, I'd like to start with your own story, your own journey into entrepreneurship. You began your career in graphic design, from what I understand, and multimedia back in the late 90s. So much has changed since the late 90s in that field, pretty much in every field, but particularly in that field. What inspired you to start your own business, and how did you transition from employee to entrepreneur? How did all that unfold?
Yeah, I think it was always my dream to start my own business, but I thought I'd start a lot later than I did. It's just, as you said, I studied graphic design multimedia in the 90s, and I got my first job in marketing in the year 2000 in Sydney, so the Olympics year of Sydney. And it was crazy. They'd never designed a website. They were an award-winning marketing company, and to think that they'd never designed a site. We had one computer with a dial-up modem and internet connection, one email address. The world has changed in marketing. So that's kind of where I started, but I did that only really for a few years before I set out on my own business venture. As I said, it was something I always wanted to do, and I thought I'd start a hell of a lot later, but I had a little opportunity come up. So a guy I knew was running a small web design agency, and he wanted to go back and get a real job because it was all too hard and stressful, and just wanted the predictability of income. And he said, "Look, I've still got a handful of clients. If you would like them, you can have them, and then look after them, and everyone's happy." So I did that, but I was completely naive. Like, I had no idea of business. I mean, I had a skill set. I could design websites and so on, and the graphic design background, but no idea how to run a business. So, I mean, I barely ever had been to a client meeting. So I'd been to a couple, but said nothing. I was just there observing, really, and taking a few notes. So to start business, and just even simple things, didn't know how to run books, didn't know how to put a proposal together, nothing. All I knew was my skill set was great. I was really confident in that, and I just had to figure it out and hustle and learn things the hard way, really. I really did a lot of things the wrong way in the early days. I think we all probably do to a degree, but I was probably an extreme example.
Yeah, when you and I share that same trait, you've always wanted to start your business. That was never my plan. I did it because it was the only way to get my product to market. I couldn't get anyone else to do it, but I had a good technical acumen, like you had a good design acumen. I knew nothing about business, and I didn't think there was much to know about business. You know, you put a shingle out, and you get a place, and you advertise, and you build stuff. And I was very naive. In fact, the traits I brought to the table when I started my business was a good technical acumen. So good for me. On the downside, yeah, my traits were passion, arrogance, ignorance, naivety, and a very poor assessment of risk. That's what I brought to the table. And that showed very quickly. But, I don't think, looking back, I could criticize myself for that, but I don't think I would have made it without that, at least the first couple of years. I needed to be ignorant to the the risk associated with the business. I needed to not know that 80% of all businesses statistically fail. I I just needed to be ignorant of the danger and just have just passion and guts and determination and perseverance. Those are the things that got me through the hard years. And part of what made it hard was
Yeah.
me, but still the rest came. And I think a lot of businesses ultimately fail because the founders don't adapt to the appropriate scale of their business. And, they're good for 2 or 3 years, and then they figured what got them from year one to year three will continue getting them to subsequent years. And usually that's a recipe for failure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, The E-Myth was a fantastic book that I read super early on, and that set up some foundations in what I was doing. But it was always a dream because I saw my uncle. He ran his business. He was an architect. I heard of stories of my grandfather and grandmother who ran bakeries, a number of bakeries that would start them, set them up, sell them, build another one, etc. So I sort of admired their tenacity to do these things and to build wealth and all that kind of stuff. But I think you're right. Like if we knew the full risk profile, we maybe wouldn't do it. I think it's kind of like having children. Like the costs of having kids is incredibly high when you calculate it over their life that you have them. No one would have kids if they realized how expensive they were, I think, but we do because we don't consider the cost.
Ignorance is bliss, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
every founder experiences growing pains. You referenced, that you've had some tough times. What were some of your early challenges in building your business, and how did you overcome them?
Well, the initially just the income was a hell of a lot less than just being employed. So I think that's one of the key things where people stumble because people will often go into business because they see their boss making a lot of money and they're getting paid pittance comparatively to what they're being charged out for. Certainly in my industry, that's sort of the case. But then you go into your own business thinking, well, I'll just get a bigger chunk of the pie. But then you realize, hey, there's so much to do in business other than the billable hours, if that's how you're billing it. But the same concept. There's stuff you do that brings in income, and there's stuff that you do just to keep things going, and all the other things that you need to do. I sort of look at it that only half your time is doing the work that makes the money, and the rest is supporting that. So that was a massive lesson to realize. And so even that helps with figuring out how much you should charge and to put worth on that, because you realize, hey, if you only want to work 40 hours, and a lot of us end up working more than 40 hours, but if that's kind of the rough benchmark globally of how much a full-time job is, then you're only going to charge for 20 hours. So therefore, all of a sudden in your mindset, you have to think, okay, well, I have to kind of double what I thought I was going to charge to get the same outcome. So that was certainly a lesson learned. I was certainly undercharging in those early days. And once I grasped that concept of only having capacity to work half a day for billable hours was a really big lesson for me.
Yeah, we used to have this saying, we lose money on every sale, but we'll make it up in volume, which is a little bit of a fallacy. It's a lie we tell
Yeah.
ourselves. You've
Yeah.
you've said in the past that you're naturally relational and enjoy connecting with people. How has that shaped the way that you lead your company and interact with your clients?
That was a really big plus because I like people, and people kind of pick up on that. So I like client meetings. As I said, I had never had really any client meetings. I'd never spoken through a proposal, any of this stuff. But I think I was just genuine and authentic in trying to serve them to the best of my ability. What I was rock solid on was the value that I could produce because I'd done it before behind the scenes in it, feel like it working in a dark room. But just to relate to people and to understand them, where they're coming from, what they're needing. And initially I was probably a little bit, I don't know, shy because I was lacked confidence. But when I started to realize, hey, people are people, and no one really minds if I stumble through a presentation and I'm sweating and all that kind of stuff. They kind of get it. I was a young fella trying to make his way. So people were really gracious in that. And I realized, hey, I'm a relational person. I can connect with these people and just talk to them as regular people and humans. It was really difficult initially to speak to really high caliber business leaders who were
Mm.
leading massive companies and that kind of thing. I just felt inferior. But once I sort of break through those kind of barriers and just was myself, just chatted to them about the footy. We have Australian rules footy, and nearly everyone in our state, Victoria, will follow a team. So it's always a really great icebreaker. You talk about the teams and so on. Even in the off season, people are talking about who's recruiting who and all that, this kind of stuff. So there's these just conversational things that I would naturally have with people I bump into the street. I just introduced that into business context and spoke to people like they were real people, and it seemed to work. It was what I really enjoyed. Once I got a handle of how to do it, it really helped.
Yeah, when I entered my industry, this was back in 1985. I was 24 years old. I entered the electronics manufacturing industry, and I was green. I did not belong there. And all of a sudden, I'm told I'm going to give a lecture at a conference. And I knew the material. I knew it probably better than any presenter knew their material, only because I had so much doubt in myself. The only thing I could do was know my material. However, I suffered a huge amount of imposter syndrome. Sounds like a similar story to yours, only mine were conference attendees, yours were client meetings. But I just doubted myself. I was absolutely 100% convinced members of the audience would out me, that I did not belong there. I was a poser. I was an imposter. And of course, that didn't happen. I think they saw, talk about authenticity, they saw the cold sweat on my brow, and they heard my voice shaking. And I think they admired the fact that I was up there feeling extremely uncomfortable and did it anyway. And I think maybe they felt sorry for me. Maybe they admired me. I don't know. But no one set out to out me as an imposter, and which I clearly was. I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't know anything 1 inch to the left or right of what I was talking about. Right. So,
Yeah.
and I speak to groups of people, that are PhDs and, scientists of various sorts. And it would have been very easy for them to publicly humiliate me if they chose to. They wouldn't have had to ask me much outside of what I'd been practicing for months for to realize I don't know a whole lot about everything, just a lot about one thing. But that's not human nature. I mean, that might be human nature in the celebrity world. We build people up, we tear them down, and we celebrate both. But in the real world, that generally doesn't happen. And I think after one or two
Yeah.
times doing that, I gained some confidence. And once I realized that they're not out to get me, then I soared after that.
Yeah. Well, most people have felt that's those same feelings. They could see the feelings you were having, or to some degree understand where you're coming from, because everyone's felt like that at some point in time.
Sure.
So yeah, people understand and so on. And yeah, I think pushing through those things, this shows reluctant entrepreneurs. I think some of that thing might be when you're a little bit reserved, or yeah, not too pushing yourself all that much. That's some of the things you just got to break through, and as you did. So same with podcasting for me. Like, this is kind of new for me. I did a number of years ago, but just recently sort of dialed it up. It felt like the first few went pretty scratchy, so I was surprised they even published them, to be honest, that they did. And I think in this day and age, with everything so perfect and polished with AI, there's something appealing to just the authentic, real conversations that people can have, even with the ums and the ahs, because we see videos now which are polished and to perfection, and but it's not real. You can kind of sense it's not real, and there's people feel a little bit ripped off when they know it's not genuine.
Yeah. Especially today, I make it a hobby of mine to spot AI work, either in printed text or in video like this. And I've gotten pretty good at it. I use AI every day. Chat GPT 5 I use, or what are they at, 6 now? Or whatever they're at. I use that every day and for research purposes. I research you through, AI. And it's just a very efficient way of, instead of me putting in 20 different search terms, I can broaden it, give it a good, well-written prompt, and boom, everything comes through. But I do make it, to me, it's a sport. When I see a post on LinkedIn and I see M dashes, for example, the long dashes, no one in this world writes, with M dashes except Chat GPT, and I can spot it.
Yeah,
I can spot its tone a little bit.
yeah.
And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily on its own. There's nothing wrong with it. It just depends on how it's being used and what it's trying to portray itself. I'm a big believer in, when I first started podcasting several years ago, I would record an interview that lasted an hour, and then I'd spend 6 hours in editing, de-umming everything and taking away slightly long pauses. And then I stopped doing that. I'm like, we're humans. Thank God we're humans. We're not machines. And when you talk to a human, you're going to get human responses. And I think today, because of this near perfectness of artificial intelligence, the contrast is much more appreciated. Because AI won't go and all that, where I will. So I do appreciate the authentic nature of human communication, backed up with help from AI, not to make it artificial, but to help the human communicate more effectively and with more facts or knowledge or research or whatever the case may be. Looking back, go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No.
It's a great amplifier, really. So once you've got something valuable to share and it's uniquely yours, and something new, hopefully, that's not just generic, produced by AI, because AI will produce just the average sum total of everything else that's already been shared. But something that you've led the thought, you're the thought leader in it, but to use the AI to amplify it and share it far and wide across platforms, that's the real power. So keeping it in its place, don't let it be your master, but you master it, and that's where the power comes.
Well, I've noticed after a solid year and a half of using AI on a regular basis, it will start to write in my voice. And if there's certain, on my technical stuff that I do, there's certain mantras that I have that are, I talk a lot about the reliability of electronics, and there are certain things that make electronics more reliable. And if I ask it to give me a broad background on something, it will throw in stuff it knows that I'm interested in and that I've said in the past. And at one point, I asked it said something so specific, which is something I say all the time, and uniquely I say it. And I said, where did that come from? And it responded, to paraphrase, this is something that, I've witnessed you say many times. So it doesn't have to be generic Google-esque. It definitely can talk like Wes talks or Mike talks, or, but it's still to the point where every once in a while it'll say something which I know scientifically is not accurate, and I'll call it out. And it will, of course, it's designed to please, so it will say, oh, thank you, you're absolutely correct. That was not correct. This is a better way to say it. And of course, every time I correct it, which doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, I know it's learning from that, right? If it gets too many corrections from too many people that are consistent, it's going to change the answer. Someone's going to benefit from me and you and all the others correcting it. Looking back, what would you consider one of your proudest entrepreneurial moments and perhaps one of your toughest lessons that you've learned along the way. So throw me a victory and throw me a challenge.
Yeah, I find the tough ones so much easier to spring to mind because like, well, one, for example, there early on, we did a website. I had a small team of web developers, and I had this lead developer who I could see was getting bored with the work. So it is fairly repetitive. We follow processes. They're quite strict to make sure that we produce the same outcome each and every time. Now, the designs vary, of course, but the technology and so on have to follow the process, and it can be monotonous and boring. So the lead developer who'd been with me for a number of years by that point, I could see he was getting bored. So this opportunity came up to do this unique website. It was a dating website. It was a number of years ago, so it was before the apps and Tinder and all of that. People were using websites to find partners and so on. So this opportunity came up, and it was quite technical. The scope of works was quite detailed, and there was a lot to go into this site. So it was a massive project, but nothing we'd ever done in the past. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to keep my lead developer engaged. I don't know how to do it. He probably does. He can help me with the proposal and so on. And if we win it, it'll be great for him. So we did that. He basically put all the proposal together and the timing and everything. So he did the whole thing. I really didn't understand how to do it at all. So he did the proposal. We won the project. It was a massive project, biggest project we ever had at that time. We've had many bigger now, but at that time it felt huge. And so we won it. And then a couple of weeks in to the project, he quit. He found another job. So I was right in that he was bored with the job and he was looking elsewhere. But he'd already found something else, and he went and took another job. And so I had this massive job that we'd committed to, and had to figure it out. So that was a painful lesson. The lots of midnight hours being burned, trying to figure it out. We got the project done, and it took me a lot of hours to figure it out and do it. The client was totally unaware of how much pain and torment that project was costing me, but it made me realize that I need to stick to our lane and what we do the best at. Because once you work out your set of offering, and you can do it repeatably and reliably, it's a great finished product for the end client. It's easier for you and less headaches. It's a win-win for everybody. But once you start trying to dabble in other things that are not really your lane, then that's when headaches arise. So from there, I really decided to really drill into our niche as well, and really distill down precisely what we feel we're the best at. So niching in to the trades and construction industry, and the exact services we would provide. No more dating websites. Someone said to me at the finish, and it became a great job, and she actually sold that business. It was an online business and did really well from it. But someone said, now that you've put all the hard work into this dating website, maybe you should make it your specialty. And I was thinking, no way am I ever doing anything like this again. So lesson learned the hard way. That was for sure. So just sticking to my lane and doing what we do really well. The success stories, I mean, I suppose there's lots of mini ones. It feels as though there's nothing massive to brag about as such, but I guess we've progressively got larger and larger clients on board. And I suppose you build a reputation, and that's just a natural evolution. Kind of started out with really tiny jobs and, charging very little and so on, and build reputation, and people start to see what you're up to, and it goes from there. I suppose, writing a book was a big thing for me, the Simple Manifesto 10 years ago. I enjoyed the process of writing, and I think that was valuable, even helping me distilling down my own thoughts and ideas and values and so on, just for myself, but also a bunch of people read it as well. And it was 10 years ago now. So I was flicking through it the other day and thinking, man, it's still relevant. Like what I've published here is still, and probably even more so, more relevant now than ever, because there was a lot of positioning your brand and considering what your values were and who you wanted to be as a business and a brand, and what positions you differently to everybody else in your industry and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's really, really true these days with mass-produced content at scale that people are doing. You really need to think about standing out and being different more than ever.
How many years have you been in business now?
20, just over 20 years. The first couple of years, I only freelanced. So I was doing, the business was effectively a business, but I was only doing it in the evenings. So that was 2003. But for the first couple of years, as I said, it wasn't really a fully fledged business, but a couple of years,
Well,
went full time.
I would consider that your biggest success by far. Here in the States, and it's probably very similar statistics in Australia, according to our U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the government agency that calculates this stuff, 80% of all new businesses ultimately fail by year 20. By year 15. 50% fail at 5 years, and 80% fail by year 15. That's just a statistic. Some industries are a little bit worse than that. Some are a little bit better than that. But the median is 80% of businesses ultimately fail. Only 20% survive. You're within the 20%, way past the 15-year threshold. So that's huge right there.
Yeah, no doubt our stats are pretty consistent with what you experienced. I hadn't heard that. I'd heard that within a couple of years, most businesses pull the pin and give up. So those first 1 or 2 years seem to be the hardest, but I didn't know about the 15-year mark.
See, that's where ignorance comes in. We should not have known that when we started. I didn't know that until well after we passed the 15-year mark, thankfully, because if I had, I don't know. I mean, if a doctor told you, hey, Wes, bad news, you have a 20% chance of survival, there's an 80% chance you're going to die. I mean, you're not going to invest in crypto or something. You're not going to make long-term plans. You're going to make very short-term plans. So I'm glad I didn't know that. You touched on something that I learned the hard way as well, and that is the most profitable word in sales I've learned is frequently no. We used to say yes to everything because it was an order. It would bring in revenue, and we didn't know what a lane was. We were off-roading. If you look at if you just imagine a lane, a single lane on a multi-lane highway, we were way off the road. We took orders for anything. If we could conceivably build it, we would do it, whether we were good at it or not, or experienced at it or not. It didn't matter. It was an order, and we were just spread so thin with orders we didn't make any money on in the long term because we weren't very good at it, that finally, through just sheer desperation, I just went through with a hatchet and just got rid of everything that wasn't in our wheelhouse. And one of the books that I read early on was a book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. And he studied pairs of publicly traded companies. And he would look at, for example, a pair of companies that did basically made the same thing, sold to the same types of people. So one of them was Schick and one of them was Gillette, shaving supplies and personal hygiene supplies and things like that. And one of them did, I forget which one did better than the other, but one of them did remarkably well in their space. And the other, with very similar products, with the same demographic customers, did not do anywhere near as well in that space. And what do the successful companies have in common, and what do the less successful companies have in common? And he came up with all these stats. And the one that landed with me was only do what you can honestly claim, honestly believe you're the best in the world at. If you are best in class, go for it. But don't do something just as an also ran. If you're not best in class, don't waste your time. Even if that means you're a smaller company.
Yeah. We see that all the time with the clients because you're building their website so you can see their service or product offering. And what tends to happen over the years is they'll build a website and it's clear and concise and compelling and all that stuff. It's right on brand. But over the course of years, they introduce new things. So they just keep putting new stuff in there, new offerings, new products. it becomes a real mess. So, and a confused mind can't make a decision. So all of a sudden you're going to the website and there's just way too much stuff in there.
Yeah.
So we're stripping a lot of that junk out. And as you say, so if you focus only on what you do best, it's so much easier to grasp for your end client, particularly in marketing, because they're so rushed to understand what you do. If you are lucky enough for them to visit your website, they really need to understand exactly what it is that you're offering and make it an engagement, some form of call to action straight away, because no one's reading through all of your service pages and your offering pages and your products or whatever it is. And you just end up diluting what you do if you try and dabble too far and wide, I think. So, and that was the same for me. And like, certainly, I think it's a scarcity thing, isn't it? When you're starting out, particularly, you because there's not much work there. You just take on everything because you need the income. But then, eventually, hopefully, you can grow out of that and focus on what you do best.
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your area of expertise, which is marketing, branding, and finding authenticity in a world that's becoming increasingly automated. You've coined the phrase search everywhere optimization. It's funny because when I think of optimization, I think of very like a funnel, very, 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 very specific and narrow. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about search everywhere optimization. How does that expand on traditional SEO? And what does it mean for companies trying to get found today?
Well, it's not as linear as it used to be. So, just briefly to touch on SEO, traditionally search engine optimization. So typically it was an effort to show up in Google effectively, other search engines as well, but to choose your keyword. So typically a keyword would be your service or your product plus your location if it's a local business. So maybe it's electrician Melbourne, for example, that would be a keyword. And so you'd select a number of those, work towards ranking as highly as you can. So showing up on Google, ideally number one, but near the top of the results. And then you would see, and it was so easy to report as well. So you would see incremental improvement for the keywords that you're trying to work on. You'd see the traffic as a consequence of those improvements, and they'd be able to see the return on investment as the end goal. So that was super easy, and we saw the improvements. And we've got clients from typical SEO for many years now. They've been with us for a long time, but there was a massive shift when Google started answering the question on page, on platform, and you see that in other platforms as well, large language models. People are using other tools to find businesses and to do research and all that kind of stuff. So there's less need to visit your website in that early researching phase. Certainly, if someone's ready to make a buying decision, that they need to engage with the business. Therefore, they need to visit them, either visit their shop front if they have one, but a lot of businesses might just have a digital shop front, the website, and that might be more convenient for people as well. So when people are ready to buy, they need to engage with the business. They will visit the website. But there's just less traffic because all that research phase, they're getting their answers and needs met elsewhere. So what is that? That's search everywhere optimization. So you think about large language models, they're pulling information far and wide online. And so there's certainly areas you can control your message about your business and your brand. So your website is one area, one key area, and it really is a pillar of what you control as a message. So when you get people there, there's no distraction for other material like there might be in social, for example. So to get your message as spread as far and as wide as you possibly can, controlling the content so it's on point and gets picked up by large language models. So you might show up. You mentioned earlier that you did a little research on me before the show, just so you had a bit of an understanding what we might talk about. So showing up, obviously searching my name, a whole bunch of stuff would show up. But if you were to search something that our company provided, that would be gold if I were to show up as the leading authority on search everywhere optimization, for example. So people will find you maybe in the larger language models. Then they might see you on social platforms, might see you on YouTube, etc. There's just so many touch points, and it's not linear like a funnel. A funnel was never, businesses never were super linear. So, and that's kind of the thinking of funnels to bring people down a path that you control. that path is eroded to some degree just because there's so much information out there, and to do research, you can get your information. So all the different AI platforms, you mentioned ChatGPT, that's the one I use as well. But yeah, just to have your message far and as wide as you possibly can, because that information is being gleaned into where we're going as AI. So that's why we're kind of working. Everywhere is a lot of places. No one can publish everywhere, but you think about the main platforms that your ideal clients might be hanging out in. But when you've got a really compelling message, a piece of content, the ideal outcome is for other people to share it. So this podcast, for example, it's a collaboration. You, the host, I'm the guest. We both can share that to our networks across many platforms or the socials. We might make reels out of it, etc. And so all of a sudden we've extended our reach far further than we could have individually, because we're doing a collaboration, but also we're sharing it on social platforms. So that's the everywhere approach of having something worthwhile sharing that's valuable, a resource that's worth sharing, and then syndicating it far and wide so you can reach more people.
Yeah, I remember the early day. I designed our company's first website, and I was kind of the webmaster for, I don't know, about a decade. And in the early days, this is 96, 97, somewhere around there, websites were, of course, much more primitive than they are today. So, we couldn't we were cognizant of how many images we put on there, because a lot of people were dialing up, and you put too many images on there, it takes forever to load it, and they go off to another page. And the other was, we didn't call it SEO back then, but it was basically, keyword based. So we would embed a phrase over and over and over and over and over again with all the keywords. It wasn't even a sentence, it was just a collection of words. And we would hide it in the page so that the spiders could see it, but the viewer couldn't. So we would print black on black or white on white. So the bottom of the page would just be this block of color, and you wouldn't know there was text in there unless you highlighted it with your mouse, and it would just have what we thought our keywords were over and over and over again. And of course, SEO with Google in particular is a giant cat and mouse game. The very second you kind of game the system, it changes, right? And they're onto you. So. But I think that AI now, I use AI to search stuff all the time, because the earlier versions of AI, as I remember, did not go out to the web. If I asked it a question, it would actually answer, like, I don't have the ability to search for that. It only knew what it had already scanned, which is mostly publications, books, and posted publications. Now it's combined web search with all that. And I don't think I'm not quite sure how it calculates that, but it doesn't seem to rely on keywords, and it seems to be a whole different form of SEO. I'm sure there is an SEO for AI, but it's far different. And I think your approach to, everywhere, because it really suits a ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever model they're using. Because it has the ability, with the quantum computers they're using, it has the ability to search everywhere in a nanosecond, where Google indexes ahead of time and has kind of answers ready to go based on certain search request keywords. And I think the AI models are very fluid in that they've already researched a bunch of stuff, but they also have the ability now to go and search the web way faster than probably Google or Yahoo and whoever else is doing search engines can do it, at least today. So it definitely is a game changer. And I think the old rules of SEO are quickly changing.
Yeah, 100% right. So everyone's tried to cheat their way to the top through Google for years and years. And as you say, so once Google figure out what people are doing, the white text on white background, those sorts of things.
That ended a long time ago.
Yeah, that one is but there's been more recent hacks to try and cheat your way to the top. Google eventually find out, and worst case scenario, blacklist you. That's rare, but normally they just downgrade your rankings. But the way to think about it is, so that was really archaic to think about the way that Google used to work. So just keywords, so the service and the location typically. Now it understands full context of sentences in conversational ways. So you don't need to use the same phrase over and over again because it knows what you're talking about, and it knows the context and the nuance and all that kind of stuff. So you don't need to think about keywords in all the right places. You need to think about
Content.
topics. So what we're encouraging clients to use the keyword list that they've always used might have used it for years, but you think about that as a silo of content. And so there might be a whole bunch of concepts around that silo that they can touch on. And then by publishing that through their blog, typically is what we encourage people to do, because that's the area you can control and it can be more substantial. And then the AI platforms will pick it up. Google will pick it up. It's fresh, unique content added to your website regularly is really going to help you in Google, and Google are using AI too. So there's no real cheating your way to the top anymore. But people do come out with little hacks to get you found on ChatGPT, etc. I don't like to dabble in that too much. I keep a finger on the pulse, of course, but I'm just always thinking about what their end goal is. And their end goal is to surface the very best information on a topic so that the person using the tool gets the best results. So producing quality content that touches on a broad range of things that are tied to what you do as a business is the best long-term play that you could ever try and do.
That's a great segue to my next question. You've said that AI often produces the average of everyone else's ideas, which makes sense. What's your process for helping clients maintain their unique brand voice while still leveraging AI tools effectively?
Yeah, so the brand voice is really important. You mentioned the tool in which you choose to use will eventually learn and pick up the way your preferences and so on. So that's ideal, but you can certainly prompt it in a more thorough way. I always encourage, if people are going to write content, for example, to have a style guide prepared that's really detailed and in depth. The big brands have always had style guides for everything. So visual branding, the written content, everything. They were really difficult for humans to follow because you'd always, say you hire a copywriter and you give them the style guide, and it can be quite detailed, but they'll always have a leaning back to their preferred. But now, I mean, the tools are so sophisticated. You can give a really, really thorough style guide of precisely how you want to communicate that's consistent throughout your whole business, and it will do that. So you can tidy up your voice, the style in which you want to share the message. So that's powerful in itself, and particularly bigger businesses where there's lots of different people dabbling in these things in different departments, etc. It can keep everything consistent within a company. So that's the real power of it. But because it's so powerful, people will, as you say, just lean on the tool for the information. So they'll if they're wanting a blog post, for example, they'll just jump on and say, "Hey, write me a blog post about blah blah blah," and so it's just pulling everyone else's thoughts and ideas. If you can flip it around and give it the ideas you want to share, but use the tool to bring it into brand voice for consistency, but also to structure it in a way that's more meaningful and makes sense. The way I do it personally, oftentimes, I'll just have an idea driving around, for example, and I'll just start brainstorming and chatting to my little friend in the phone, I call it. So, and she's helping me understand my own thoughts and articulate them in better words. But it's my thoughts because I'm telling it what I'm thinking about and what I'm wanting to write a blog post about, for example. So it might be based on having a client meeting, and I came up with some ideas based on their questions. So I came up with something, talking to my phone on the drive home, and then the next time I open up the computer, it's there ready to publish effectively. So you're leading it, the thoughts and ideas, rather than the other way around, which can be a dangerous space. If you're not adding anything unique, there's no value in it, and therefore it's highly unlikely that it will surface, because those concepts and ideas have already been shared by others if you're just letting it be the average of everything else.
Yeah. So your among other things, among building your empire, you're also an author. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and I brought it up in the intro. Your book, The Simple Manifesto, has really resonated, from what I understand, with business owners who are tired of overcomplicating their marketing. Let's talk about that a bit. Your book, again, The
Yeah,
Simple
that's right.
Manifesto. What's that?
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Your book, The Simple Manifesto, encourages business owners to simplify their marketing and focus on what really matters. What inspired you to write it, and what problem were you trying to solve for entrepreneurs that caused you to write it?
I was probably just trying to solve my own problems a little bit 10 years ago. So it was things I've thought about for a long time, and some of it had been based on some blogs. I'd been blogging at that time for a while. Um, Actually, someone mentioned, "Hey, your blog's fantastic. You should think about writing a book." And so I thought, yeah, that's probably something I would enjoy doing. So I wrote the book. And the curious thing, I thought I hadn't thought about it much over the last few years, but I was just flicking through it the other day and thinking, man, this is good. This is really good. This is probably more useful now than it was back then, in a day and age where there's just a flood of information and so much content out there. It's hard to discriminate with what's quality and what's not, and what's true and what's authentic and what's fake. And so we see that. I mean, through social media, you see all the various ideas and crazy ideas sometimes. So there's no way of necessarily figuring out what's genuine and authentic, but if you can cut through all the noise, that's ideal. And the way to cut through is obviously to simplify, so someone can grasp precisely what it is and what's important, and they can understand it, so they can make a decision. If it's marketing, you want them to make some form of decision, to make an inquiry, to go to the next step, whatever it is. So to simplify in this day and age of an abundance of materials, I think the real gold will be, and the real high performers will be those that can take lots of ideas, lots of concepts, and be the authority in that space, so they can distill down the few things that are important and meaningful for the end person. So it's not about all the information anymore. It's about finding the pieces of the puzzle that are required and are needed by the end client or customer at that time.
In your book, you introduce the SNAP framework: a standpoint, nonconformist approach, and position. Which of these principles do you think most businesses overlook, and how can they begin applying it today?
I think a nonconformist view is helpful, because it's probably the quickest shortcut to being distinctly unique. And what I mean by nonconformist is to think about your industry that you're in, and typically, particularly when we're starting out in business, there's probably a whole range of things that we don't like in our industry that we think we can do better, or our competitors do it a certain way, and we've found a better approach. So those sorts of ideas are really the key pieces of the puzzle that you need to communicate. So for your whatever industry you're in, probably all your competitors are educating everybody about the rough concept and ideas of the industry, how it works. But your unique parts are what you need to share, because everyone else has shared the rest of the story. So to highlight those things that make you a little bit different. Uh, Oftentimes we're talking to clients, and sometimes we work with mainly trades and construction, and so they're great, pragmatic people. They're on the tools. They usually work their way up from being on the tools, apprentice and fully qualified, and then they're in some form of leadership role, and then they become a founder of their own business, doing the same thing they've been doing all these years. So they're not necessarily really wanting to have big long conversations. But what I have found is they find it super easy to say what's not right in their industry, or what could be done better, or what typical clients and customers might complain about in their industry. So they're the really good topics to discuss behind closed doors, because you don't want to be negative in your marketing. But there's always a flip side. So you think about what the the shadow is, the dark side of the industry, and think about what you bring that's completely different to that and focus on those positives.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to wrap up with just a couple more questions. For entrepreneurs feeling overwhelmed by all the AI hype, and there is a lot of AI hype out there, or by marketing in general, what's your advice for finding that healthy balance between technology, simplicity, and authenticity?
Yeah, that's true. So the AI tools can really help simplify. There's so much tech, and it depends on what the nature of the business is, but there's things that can help streamline process so far more superior to what's been in the past. So I would say use the tech, but only to the degree in which it helps facilitate the outcome that you've always tried to achieve. So that's one piece of the puzzle, because you might be able to make things more efficient, and then it's more cost effective for you and more profitable, hopefully, as well. But think you also got to realize your competitors are doing the same thing. So, and you don't want to race to the bottom, which is what happens if you've got nothing else to compete on but price alone.
Right.
That's a dangerous territory to play in. So you've really got to think about what new value you can bring. And as I said before, it might be about, hey, there's all these concepts and ideas and research out there that people can dabble in, but you, as the authority in the space you play in, if you are the one that are relied upon to make the simple suggestions and ideas and put things together, I think that thought leadership in the niche you work in is really going to be the power moving forward. So that's how we become valuable in a day and age where the tech is going to continue to improve and enhance and make things anyone can do. The tech side eventually, I think. So that human aspect that you can bring, that only you can bring, the lessons and insights and ideas that come from years of experience, I think that's going to be true value.
If you were to go back 20 years, so this is Wes's first day in this new business, what advice would you give yourself?
I think the first thing I would have done is join some networking groups earlier. I didn't even know about networking groups, but the magic of that was not so much about trying to win business in the room, but to speak even publicly. Some of the groups, I don't know if you've been to many networking events, but sometimes you'll have opportunity to stand up in front of a room full of people and present your business in it, like an elevator pitch style. I think if I had have done that earlier, I would have streamlined a whole lot of things, because you just learn by observation and trying and practicing and doing that stuff. So I think networking is a great tool. Structured networking that make you force you to speak publicly is a really important thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And finally, last question. I tend to ask more than one last question, but this is the last question. How did you define success when you first started your business, and how do you define it today?
That's a great question. So initially it was just a matter of putting food on the table to get enough income. So it was really profit oriented, just because it needed to be, because when you don't have enough, that's a frightening thing. So that's how it was initially, that just to be really profitable and so on, and build wealth. That kind of happened, but these days more so, I've just brought my son on board as a team member. He does the social media publishing for us and the videos and all that kind of stuff. So to mentor I think I'll measure success by what I can invest into my children to see them go even further. So my son, he wants to do similar business to what I do now, but he'll take it in a different direction. And my other kids, as they get older, the more I can invest into them and through the lessons I've learned the hard way, hopefully they don't have to learn so much the hard way, and they can learn from me a little bit. Hopefully they'll listen.
That's great. And this is episode 34 on this new podcast. And the 33 entrepreneurs that I've talked to and asked that same final question to prior to you have never had the same answer, meaning how they defined success was in the early days was vastly different than they defined it today. And I'm happy for that, because if everyone, pretty much everyone says money, right? Food on the table, right? Cover the mortgage or whatever. That's totally understandable. There's no other choice. I would be disappointed if 20 years later, Wes would say, money, the same as before, just more of it, right? Because that's very superficial. And I think that if you chase money, you're not going to have a successful business. You'll chase money. You probably get money at the expense of happiness, freedom, time, family, friends, all that. It's like making a deal with the devil. So I am very uplifted by all the responses I've received from all of the entrepreneurs I've talked to in terms of the higher level definition of success that they have grown into. And, if someone were to ask me that, I think my answer today would be freedom. Freedom involves some degree of financial wherewithal, but it involves so much more than that as well. And it's kind of a cheating answer because it's like everyone's answer combined, rolled up into one. But I think that's, if you're fortunate enough to be within the 20 percentile that make it, as you are, I do think that, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, quite literally blood, sweat, and tears. And to be able to come out the other end with that kind of higher level appreciation of what success is, that's the win right there, right? That beats all the other individual definitions of success. So to my audience who would like to get more information on Wes's company, if you're watching this on YouTube, look down here and where it says see more, and there'll be a link to Wes's company there, perfectly optimized. And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, when you get to your destination, when you get off the treadmill, whatever you're doing, when you stop doing that, look at your show notes on your podcast app, and that information will be there as well. Wes Towers, I would say good luck, but I don't think you need it. You're way past that. So thank you for being my guest today. Thanks for educating me and my audience on what you do and how you do it and why you did it.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure to be on the show. I appreciate your time.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. Special thanks to Wes Towers for being my guest on the show. We've been busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe to be notified when new episodes drop. New episodes are released twice a month on the first and third Tuesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. Those 2 simple clicks really help us expand our reach. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, I'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com to apply or recommend a guest. You can also reach me directly at mike@reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com. And time for a quick shameless plug if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable. It's available in paperback and Kindle versions on Amazon and as an audiobook on Audible and Amazon. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until next time, be unstoppable.